While most people think the biggest fear people have is of death, when asked, the average person fears speaking in public more than death. Jerry Seinfeld said it best in a joke he wrote about the fear of public speaking. He said, "I read a thing that actually says that speaking in front of a crowd is considered the #1 fear of the average person. I found that amazing. #2 was death. That means to the average person, if you have to be at a funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than doing the eulogy. Now, to some of you, that might sound ridiculous, but according to statistics, 75% of Americans suffer from this fear, and believe it or not, I am one of them. This is a very real fear called glossophobia. However, you don't always have to suffer from this fear. It can be managed and even cured. Today, I want to talk to you about glossophobia and how people suffer from this fear of speaking in public. First, I will tell you a little bit about how this fear has affected me and how some of you can recognize this fear in yourselves. Next, I want to talk a bit about what causes this fear. And finally, I want to teach you some ways that you can overcome this fear. This isn't an easy thing to deal with, and I'd like to help make the lives of people who suffer from this a little easier. So first, let me tell you a little bit about my fear of public speaking and how you can tell if you suffer from glossophobia too. This fear has been something that I have been living with for as long as I can remember. In fact, I can remember one of the very first times I had to speak in class. I was fairly young, only in the 2nd grade, and we were asked to do a presentation. I can remember being very excited before my presentation because I really wanted people to see all the hard work I had put into this project. But something changed as soon as I got in front of the class. Almost immediately, I started to forget everything I had been practicing to say, and what I could get out was very quiet. After repeated pauses and requests for me to speak up, I was asked to sit down. I can remember walking back to my seat feeling like my face was on fire and like my stomach was doing flip-flops. This doesn't sound too bad, but to a kid, it can really be horrifying. And things only got worse from there. To this day, I have a fear of speaking in public, and my symptoms have only gotten worse over time. Now, when I have to speak in public, I get very sick beforehand, sometimes having panic attacks where I feel like I can't even breathe, other times repeatedly throwing up. When and if I finally make it to the stage, I still speak too quiet to be heard and too fast to be understood. I sweat profusely and turn bright red. In fact, when it comes to speaking in public now, I mostly avoid it. I go out of my way to make sure I see situations where I speak in public coming and do everything I can to not be there to do it. Now, most of you don't have symptoms this severe, so you may be asking yourself, how do I know if I suffer from glossophobia? So here are some of the symptoms to watch out for. Acute hearing problems, increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, dilated pupils, increased oxygen intake, increased perspiration, dry mouth, quivering voice caused by tension, and stiffening of the neck and upper back muscles. In some of the more severe cases, you may experience nausea and vomiting under the influence of added stress and anxiety. And some people, like me, even experience panic attacks. So if you think you may have glossophobia, you may want to ask yourself if you suffer from any of these symptoms when asked to speak in public. If you do, you may be asking yourself, what causes this? Why me? So let's take a look at what happens when someone speaks in public. It should be good news to speakers everywhere that even the best of the speakers get nervous. These nerves are simply adrenaline caused by our flight or fight response. This flight or fight response, often referred to as an adrenaline rush, is caused by a stress signal sent from the brain to the adrenal gland. The hormone release called epinephrine speeds up the rate of respiration, thus quickening blood flow to the muscles, increasing oxygen to the lungs, and giving the body a surge of energy. And some people, like me, simply feel overwhelmed by this burst of energy. But why only some of us? Some experts like trainer Steve Sisgold believe that this fear is caused by a traumatic incident in childhood. For instance, he might say that when I gave the presentation as a child, I was traumatized, and that led to my fear of speaking in public. This is actually a very popular belief when it comes to the question of what causes glossophobia. But can one childhood incident really cause someone like me to be scared to speak in public for the rest of their lives? Some doctors believe that it is actually hardwired into people like me to be scared to speak in public, that I am born more susceptible to things like anxiety. And this actually may have some merit, as most of us who suffer from glossophobia also suffer from other types of anxiety. But the sad fact is, we really have no idea of what really causes this phobia. But we do know that glossophobia is a type of anxiety. It is even called speech anxiety, so it may have a lot in common with other types of anxiety. But while we may not know exactly what causes it, we do have ways to fight it. There is no singular cure that works for everyone, but there are ways to combat and even overcome this fear. So let's learn some ways to fight this fear. Some doctors believe the best way to fight this fear is with therapy. There are a lot of therapies out there, everything from behavioral therapy to talk therapy, and each of these therapies has had its fair share of success with helping people with glossophobia. One therapy who shows a lot of promise is exposure therapy. During this therapy, you are exposed to what you're afraid of, in this case, speaking in public, in small doses that get bigger with time as you become more comfortable with each step. This is done until you are actually comfortable speaking in front of groups. And this is actually working for a lot of people. But let's say you've tried the therapy or simply don't like therapy. There is another way of fighting your fear of speaking in public, and that is medication. Again, there are a bunch of medications prescribed for this particular fear, everything from anti-anxiety drugs to antidepressants, and they each have their own level of success with different patients. But with these, you have to think about side effects. Each medication has its own possible side effects, some that are even worse than what you originally suffered from. So medications are usually reserved for the more severe cases of speech anxiety and should be taken with caution. However, one medication a lot of people want to know about are beta blockers. They want to know if they can be taken to combat the fear of speaking in public. And the answer to that is not a simple yes or no. They are not taken for anxiety and they do not help with the psychological symptoms of glossophobia. However, they do suppress the physical symptoms, like shaky hands and symptoms of adrenaline. So while some people do take these to help speak in public, they do not cure glossophobia. Now, for those of you who don't like therapy and simply don't want to be put on drugs, there are things that you can do yourself to fight this fear. Some tips that can actually help you overcome glossophobia are simple, and they include learning as much as you can about your topic, find out who your audience will be, prepare for your presentation, don't memorize your speech, practice, practice, and practice, anticipate questions your audience may ask, dress well, but comfortably, stop telling everyone how nervous you are, keep a glass of water next to you for the dry mouth, find some friendly faces in the audience to focus on, use visual aids like a slideshow, and speak slowly. This may actually help you overcome your fear all on their own, but like I said, not one thing works for every person. So try a few of them and find out what works best for you. As I said, this is a very real fear that many Americans suffer from, but it can be overcome. I have the fear of speaking in public, and you may too, but now you know how to tell, and you also know the causes of this fear. So you can better understand what is happening to you and fight it. And finally, I've given you some ways to fight this fear. No single treatment works for every person, so it's up to you to find the one that works for you. This fear can cripple you, whether it hinders your career, affects your education, or simply keeps you from even having friends. But it does not have to control you. I have lived with this fear for years, and today, I choose to fight. Do you?